Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today we're talking about ethical questions from Spider-Man No Way Home. We're looking at Spider-Man's actions. We're looking at the actions of the villains and do they have agency? We're looking at how are these things different metaphors? And we're also going to be asking a couple of questions about why are we releasing this now? All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host. I'm joined by erstwhile guest, occasionally co-host, but really just a guest at large, Mr. Paul Hoppy. Paul, how are we doing today?
Doing very well, thank you.
Cool. Well, let me start by just explaining, because some folks had wondered, why didn't we put out an episode when this movie came out in theaters, and why are we putting it out now? And the reason is simple. We're putting this out now because now every person has access to this movie. Obviously, as we're recording this, we're still in kind of a transition period with COVID. Many things are getting better. Many people still have some very legitimate concerns. And when the movie came out in theaters, that was great. I found a way that I was comfortable watching it, but not everybody did. And I'm a big believer that I want everyone to have access to these movies. Frankly, I think it's outrageous that the companies aren't doing the automatic release on both online and theaters the way they were doing for a while. That's not something I think we're going to have any ability to change anytime soon, but certainly I would love it if companies went back to that. But the important point is, I think, A, because Paul hadn't seen it before until now, but just also for the many other viewers who probably hadn't seen it because they were waiting for online, either for their own concerns or because they live in a part of the world where it's not safe or not even possible to go. I think our general attitude is going to be when things are not released online, sometimes this won't be the case, but for the most part, we're going to hold off on recording about them until they are available for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. I've got a lot of thoughts about this movie, and I'm looking forward to talking about a lot of the decisions that go into the movie, within the movie, within the context of the movie. The decisions that went on external to the movie about how to release it and stuff like that, how to market it, I think are also interesting. I think we've talked about that a lot on a bunch of other episodes. So, I won't rehash all of, my position. People can go back and listen to, I think the year-end summary was the one where, where I went over that the most from my point of view. I mean, the only movie I've gone to see in the last 2 years and change is Shang-Chi. And that was actually only to do it for the podcast. And I went to a drive-in, which was I watched the movie online some number of months later, and I was like, oh, this is much better. Like, it's just it's a viewing experience I like more. And there's things that I know there's things that some people feel. I mean, there's a different experience in a theater, right? And there's definitely a different experience in a car, 100 feet away from a screen. That's another thing, right? I appreciate that there's things about the theater that people love. I think exactly when this movie came out, things were obviously a lot worse than they are now, right? But regardless, I mean, for a lot of people, even way before any pandemic, there were reasons that people would rather see a movie at home, And so I think having that as an option, I think is fantastic. And I did a lot of acrobatic spoiler dodging to, to kind of not know exactly what happened throughout the entire movie. And that was fairly successful. Unfortunately, the post-credit screen is just a straight-up trailer for another movie. Yeah. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, okay, I wasn't going to okay, whatever.
That is the first time I have walked out of a Marvel movie before the final credits since I knew that was a thing. Because the mid-credit scene, there is some cool stuff. We learn a little more about Venom and Venom being a part of this universe somehow. But I don't want to watch a trailer for Doctor Strange because I don't want to be spoiled. And I'm very glad someone told me that because I could just walk out. So anyway, as you said, Paul, we've talked about that before. But I just wanted to explain to people why we're releasing this now and why we'll probably continue to do that. I'm not going to promise it's going to be forever. There might be a movie where I know especially Paul is not as interested in it. Someone else I know has seen it, but we're going to try as much as possible because I just think it's an equity issue. So with that, we're going to dive into the ethical questions specifically, but I want to start just kind of general thoughts. What was your overall thought about this movie?
I'd say my review is I found it 50% charming, 50% kind of boring, 50% insufferable, and 50% too long. And the math does check out, by the way.
Okay. Now, it sounds like that's only like 1/4 liking the movie, except it's 50% of 200%. So
Right. Well, it's 150%, but 50% of that 150% was too long. Therefore, it's all that's why it's 100%, so it works out. There was a half movie worth of stuff I really enjoyed.
nice.
So I enjoyed that part.
What was some of the stuff you enjoyed?
I really liked the 3 Spider-Men,
Yeah.
or 3 Spider-Mans, if you want to put it that way. I enjoyed the interplay between them. I thought there were a lot of really nice moments. I'm not sure how much each of them really matches up with their original portrayal in their earlier movies, but some time has obviously passed for each of those characters who are coming from their other movies. It's weird to say a movie felt 50% long, but that the end didn't feel like it dragged to me.
Yeah.
For some reason, the end did it was the beginning felt like it dragged to me.
That's fair.
And then there were some moments that I just really didn't like. And I also loved the concept of trying to help your villains. I mean, after the 10 Batman episodes we've just done, I think like we were talking about really wanting to see kind of something sort of like this in some ways. And I think you kind of were like, oh, let's circle back to that, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate
this was exactly why, because I knew
spoilers.
you hadn't seen Spider-Man yet, but I knew this was exactly what was going to come up.
Right, of course. And I really love that concept. The execution left something to be desired for me.
Yeah.
And I do think that it brings up a lot of great stuff for us to talk about on this show. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like what I really liked and was intrigued by, and I'm going to enjoy discussing.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a very different experience in the movie, and I wonder if it's in part because I saw it in a theater, because in the movie, I had a fantastic time. I especially I was in a place where I'd seen Loki. I think I'd seen the Eternals before this. I don't remember the order of that. Maybe I'd seen the Eternals after, but I was definitely not in a happy with Marvel kind of a place.
Right.
And I just found this was 2 really fun hours to spend at the theater. And then I get out of the theater and I started talking to people about the movie and I started thinking more about it. And I was like, I knew in the movie that I disagreed with Peter's actions. And we'll talk about that. I think it's going to be a big crux of what we get into with the ethics of this movie. But it was also that kind of thing where once I was out of the movie, I started like, oh yeah, that didn't really make sense. Oh yeah, I didn't really love that. I didn't really love, but in the time and place, I just had a great time. And
Right.
I do wonder if part of that's because I was surrounded by a bunch of other people who were all laughing at the same jokes, who were all kind of cheering at the fun moments. And I wonder if that was, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I wonder if that is part of the theater experience you can have, getting kind of wrapped up in it and caught up in it.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I mean, I remember going to see, the Star Wars re-releases and the feeling of the way the crowd was reacting was a very big part of the experience. Now, I'd already seen the movies. I'm talking about the kind of remastered,
Yeah.
/ butchered versions that George
Guido
Lucas
does
had.
not shoot first, but that one does. But yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. And the sort of cheering every time a character comes on for the first time. I can see how that's a part of an experience, and how that can kind of change the lens through which then future parts of the movie are felt and or kind of maybe sometimes even glossed over. There's sometimes lines that'll happen after some big moment and we won't catch it if the theater's really loud. You literally just can't hear it, right? Whereas at home, unless you're with someone who's really loud while watching,
Yeah.
it can be a very different experience.
There were 2 other things that I really liked about this movie, and these are, I'm going to use these kind of segues because these are kind of ethical issues in terms of how movies are made, but also just I think things were great. The term America's sweetheart has never really made sense to me in terms of there being one actress who just, you can't help but fall in love with her a little bit anytime she's on screen. Except Zendaya to me now kind of makes me get that concept because I found her so incredibly charming as, and I mean, it's not, in part it's I think because I just rewatched the earlier movies a week beforehand. Kirsten Dunst is a fantastic actress. I think this is the writing. But she's just so boring as MJ. And the portrayal of Gwen is better, I think, in the second set of movies. But still, this MJ has agency. She has relatability. she pursues Spider-Man and Peter Parker as much as he pursues her. And now I've watched the TV show Euphoria, in which she's playing such a different character, and I now just have so much respect for her as an actress. But even beyond then, I found her presence in the movie so wonderful and adding to the story, but also adding to my enjoyment of it all.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I've really enjoyed her MJ throughout all three movies.
Yeah.
Homecoming was by far my favorite Spider-Man movie of
Mm-hmm.
this trio. It's pretty much on a level with the original, the very first Spider-Man movie.
Right.
And I think I actually had a very similar experience of watching Homecoming, where I was kind of like, I just wasn't that excited. Like I felt like I'd seen so many superhero movies in kind of a short period of time, and I just kind of went to see it, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like,
Yeah.
And she was a big part of that, even though she wasn't as pivotal a character in that one.
Right.
But then also her and the relationship between her and Peter in Far From Home was one of my favorite parts of that movie. And then here also, I think she was great. I feel a little bit like she was maybe like underutilized.
I think that's fair.
But at the same time, I also think the movie was too long. So
I mean, it's one of those things that we keep getting into where I still have not. I have yet to see something in the last year or so as a movie where I didn't think that was fun, but I think it might have been better as a 6 to 8 episode series.
Oh, yeah.
This one, I feel like, yeah, it felt very long in some ways, but also there are a lot of stories that I wish they'd spent more time with. And her and Ned, I think, were definitely one.
Yeah. You mentioned spending an enjoyable 2 hours at the movie, but it was 2.5 hours. Just for the record. I mean, not as bad as the new Batman being 3 hours, and I mean, we're not in Snyder territory or anything. But I agree. I feel like you could have told a longer story in a different format.
Right.
I feel like for being a movie, it felt like there were just parts that felt to me like sort of superfluous, given how much other stuff was kind of going on. And I don't know. It just.
Well, especially because, and this is, I think, one of the things that I was most excited for you to learn about, and I found out you got spoiled on. But even then, like, it thrilled me in the moment, but I was also very disappointed in terms of what it could be. You and I talked a lot while we were watching the Netflix shows that one of the reasons why we loved the Matt Murdock Daredevil character, at least I certainly did, and I think you had some thoughts about this as well, is the idea of addressing legal questions in the Marvel Universe around the Sokovia Accords, around all of that. And I know that in the Daredevil comics, there's a lot of that. Daredevil is the lawyer who argues about Sokovia Accord. I think he is Spider-Man's lawyer.
Right.
And when Spider-Man reveals himself. And so that opens up all of these awesome questions about the legality of the Sokovia Accords and someone like Peter and what's the responsibility and what isn't. And so when Matt appeared on screen, I mean, first I just went absolutely wild. I was like, thank God Daredevil's in it. I managed to avoid the spoiler about it. And him catching the brick was a brilliant moment. But then when I realized, wait, no, this is going to short circuit all the interesting legal questions that the second movie set up, we are going to completely ignore and just have Matt wrap it all up on screen. I was pretty disappointed by that, both because it's underutilizing Matt, but also because Matt should be this entry point to this whole world of ethical questions that we just completely ignored.
Yeah, so just a sidebar on the Matt Murdock appearance. I had known that this was probably what happened, but nobody had verbally confirmed it to me until someone who hadn't even seen the movie did spoil it by accident. But then the very next day, I saw a YouTube thumbnail that showed the whole thing, and I'm like, okay.
No.
I'm like, please don't feel bad about spoiling it, because YouTube did that literally right after, within 12 hours. The fact that I was able to dodge that until mid-March, I think is pretty amazing.
Definitely.
But, and I appreciate you not mentioning it. I do think that it's kind of like a sort of perfunctory fan service cameo, where it's oh yeah, there's Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, and we know he's Daredevil, except maybe in this universe he's not yet. We don't know. But and he caught a brick. Oh, okay. And then that's it. It's it was just, he was basically there as a means of delivering the exposition that you don't actually have to worry about this from a legal sense, which to me was like this whole idea of the identity reveal was like the big stinger at the end of Far From Home, which I wasn't crazy about. I didn't love the end of Far From Home, and I have some issues with the movie. I didn't hate it either. But it's here, then it was just kind of like, they're like, we're going to spend half an hour or 20 minutes showing how this is like really a problem and a big deal, and then make it totally irrelevant. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, maybe you could have just not even done that 20 minutes, or you could have made a movie about that. But I feel like this very much wasn't a movie about that, whether it's the legal issues or the actual ramifications of his identity being revealed. It was, the whole movie was about the ramifications of irresponsible use of magic. Yeah. I think
that's a good way to say it. And to me, it didn't feel like a cameo, in part because, I mean, it's funny, literally walking out of the theater after seeing Far From Home, I turned to my partner and was like, you know what this means? Spider-Man's in legal trouble. That's how we get Matt Murdock into the MCU.
Right.
So it felt like, in some ways, it didn't feel like a surprise because that's what happens in the comics. It's so perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, one thing you and I talked about a while ago, maybe I was more on this side, is that I was kind of okay with cameos in terms of, if here's the person who should show up for this 30 seconds,
right,
don't give us some random person, just give us that person,
you
know? And so to that degree, I liked it. I would have liked more of it, but I understood why it wasn't going to happen. But yeah, it just sucked to me that like we then didn't get everything else, all the other questions about the legality of it. So the one other kind of little thing I wanted to throw in, and this isn't as much an ethics issue as just sort of like Hollywood politics stuff. Not even politics, but just kind of dealing with the past. I have always thought that the Andrew Garfield movies were, well, let me back up a second. I didn't watch the Andrew Garfield movies for a long time because I thought the original Tobey Maguire movies were great. I hated the idea of remaking them like 5 years later. Innocent me who thought that would be a one-time thing.
Yeah, that's just how everything is now.
But yeah, I mean, now it's like not even a big deal. And then I just heard all this bad stuff about them and all these people who didn't like them, and so I never watched them. And so I finally got around to watching them to get ready for this movie, and I absolutely loved them. And I thought Garfield was fantastic. And then I saw Garfield in Tick, Tick, Boom, which I thought he was very, very good in as well. And so having him come back into this, like, Tobey Maguire was fun too. The youth pastor joke was a fun joke. But having Garfield come back and be able to be heroic and be beloved by the audience again, and then especially him getting, the totally traumatic moment of him trying to save Gwen and it not working, and then we never get the movie that's the payoff to that, of him dealing with that trauma. Having him come back, be a hero, he being the first one to come back before Tobey Maguire. My audience, just everyone cheered so loud when he pulled off that mask and you saw who it was. And then him getting to literally save MJ in almost the same way that he didn't save Gwen.
Right after Peter 1 didn't.
Right. Peter 1 tried. Green Goblin knocked him out of the way so he couldn't. And you see MJ's moment where she knows that. And she's like, I'm about to die. And then he saves her. And she's like choked up, but he's choked up. And she's literally just had this I'm about to die experience. And she's like, are you okay?
Yeah.
It just, I saw it in the theater the first time I saw it. And it meant so much to me to give Garfield that moment again.
Yeah, I did think that was a really powerful moment. I thought he was very good in this movie. I feel like he wasn't my main problem with the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I didn't particularly like them at the time. I felt like they were just doing some really weird stuff with the character, but that's I'm not trying to convince anyone not to like them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lizard Man is the most boring of villains, and as shown by the fact that he's barely utilized in this movie.
Right, exactly. Like, he was in this movie, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked him better in this than in those ones. And there were things in those movies that I liked, I guess. But I didn't do the whole rewatch, the 10 movies that you need to watch to have the full context for this. Maybe it's even more than that. If you include the Venoms and Infinity War and Civil War, and
I just watched all the movies that had the actual Spider-Man in the title. So the 3 Tobey Maguires, so for me it was 7. 3 Tobey Maguires, 2 Garfields, and then 2 Tom Holland's.
Right. And then there's like another 3 like MCU movies, and then there's 2 Venom movies. So I guess we're up to 12. You need to watch 12 movies for the full context of this, plus the Netflix Daredevil series.
Right.
And I guess Doctor Strange also you should probably watch. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's get into some of the actual specific questions, because I do think there were some great ethical questions in this movie. Peter being outed. I know you said you didn't love that necessarily. So let's start with like all the stuff around Peter getting outed and his identity. We talked about how I wish there'd been more about the legal side of it, but I did really like getting to explore this question of kind of where does superhero culture interact with celebrity culture? So I feel like that's something that's never really been fully addressed. And I did think there was something kind of brilliant in this whole idea of the media loves him, the public loves him, but the moment there's any kind of hint of scandal, everybody turns on him immediately.
Right, but not like everybody, like a large section of people.
Right.
And it's very polarizing, right? It seems.
Right.
Because clearly he still had a ton of huge supporters, but there were some very vocal people who wanted to be like, oh, I knew all along, blah, blah, blah. This and that was a conspiracy and blah, blah, blah. I do think it's an interesting kind of, take on celebrity culture and how that would interact with there being superheroes. I kind of feel like what with half of the world being snapped out of existence and then being brought back and all that stuff, and the Avengers having stopped that or like undone it or whatever, it's kind of unclear how much people know about whatever actually happened. But there are extents to which I find it a little less. I find some of that less credible in the context of the whole MCU than I would have if there hadn't been so many savings of the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if all the other movies had been lower stakes or Spider-Man had been more of just like a neighborhood hero, I feel like that would have been more, it would have felt more realistic to me. Whereas it feels a little bit, I'm sort of like, okay, sure. Like, I feel like it would be a much smaller percentage of people who would actually have this kind of negative reaction. It's like, all the things that we already know can be faked. Like, it's so easy for somebody to be like, oh, that's obviously taken out of context or blah, 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 and maybe even cut together something else where it's like, it shows someone saying the opposite or whatever, or like saying there's someone else or blah, 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 And so, I think that's a very interesting thing to explore. It didn't really play quite right for me.
That's fair.
The government involvement was kind of the bigger problem for me with there were the legal issues, but then there weren't. And then there were like all of those, stormtroopers there basically when, at Happy's condo, but then like on the Statue of Liberty, like no police show up at all. No military, it's like, it felt inconsistent in that regard to me. It felt like they wanted to play certain notes, but then kind of ignore that consequence. So it felt like it lacked continuity to me. But I think it's a very interesting topic.
I think the inconsistency is a very fair point, because it does feel like to me, ever since Civil War, people in this universe have cared about Sokovia Accords as much or as little as they need to suit the plot.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like, at this point, I sort of feel like, okay, each movie is going to set the exact parameters of where those dials are, and it's not really going to fit the rest of the movies, but that's fine. But you're right. I think it doesn't line up. And just to be clear, I think when I talked about everyone turning against him, what I was more talking about is I feel like it is an interesting picture of the anatomy of a scandal like that. In that first moment, the crowd watching, everyone seems to turn against him. And they even turn against MJ at first, oh, you're his girlfriend, etc. And part of it's a curiosity more than a hate, but there is definitely a lot of the hate. But then you're right. Then he gets his story out and the legal stuff changes. And then we get to the point where, in what I did love, that scene in the school where the two teachers are like, no, we love you. You're great. And the one's like, we don't trust you. I believe, Mysterio and all that kind of stuff.
No, I thought that scene itself, I think, was fantastic. More like that would have been great.
Yeah.
And I agree that is kind of how they portrayed it or whatever. And that first scene did feel like everyone was against him. And I think they were trying to give you that impression. And then they were trying to be like, oh, well, actually, it's more like this. And that's fair.
Yeah.
But yeah, that scene in the school was one of the best, like, funny scenes that was kind of just there for.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of consistency, I will say, as someone who has a little, who has been to college and has read an article about a college ever, the idea that every college in America would not want controversy, like that they wouldn't want the
Right.
huge media storm of everyone
Right.
like MIT saying no, fine, Ivy League saying no, fine, but like Vassar, the school I went to, which is in New York State, a very good school, not the tier. They would love Spider-Man to come to their campus,
Yeah.
To me, I think one of the main ethical questions of this movie, and the first one I really want us to dive into, so this starts with, so much of the movie seems to be about Peter's desire to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
And this overarching question of, does great power come with responsibility? And we'll talk about the specific moments, but I feel like overall, I think Peter, and especially what the other Peters talk him into, is just dead wrong. Like, it seems so often he's trying to fix things without giving other people agency and kind of like without thinking of the consequences. And granted, some of that he realizes, but what do you kind of think of Peter overall in this movie?
Terrible. No, I mean,
yeah,
I feel like throughout the movie, Peter wants to do things that he thinks will help people. I think that's clearly his primary motivation, right? So clearly nothing he does is out of like evil or malice except trying to kill Goblin. But aside from that, he's very much, I'm going to try to help people. I think a lot of it is very misguided and very, very poorly thought out.
Mm-hmm.
And, whether or not he's consulting with the people he's trying to help, I think is a really big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor Strange, it's funny. It's like the first movie, I mean, Homecoming, right, dealt with Tony Stark, this very powerful, not super responsible person, kind of mentoring Peter and helping him do some stuff and whatever, but then also kind of not mentoring him. And then some of what I thought were the best parts of Far From Home, aside from, MJ and Ned and that dynamic, were the sort of the dealing with the loss of Tony, right?
Yeah.
And, in this movie, I was like, didn't we just have this whole like grieving thing? Like, do we have to do this again? Here, then they replace this kind of irresponsible, sort of mentorish kind of older figure with another very powerful, not super responsible, not the best judgment all the time, very egotistical. I mean, I've seen people draw comparisons between like Doctor Strange and Tony Stark, and I think they're reasonable,
Yeah.
And
I think especially because since Tony Stark left, I think they've emphasized those parts of Strange's character. Strange has kind of become more of that role in the MCU.
Yeah, I think so. The whole thing from the beginning is like, you're going to mind wipe the entire planet so that you and your friends, particularly your friends, that's the good-hearted part, right? It's not totally selfish. But like, so your friends can get into college. When you also have connections with like the biggest tech company in the world, and like probably you don't need to go to college. What do you need to go to college for? You could get, get some kind of a grant from Pepper. Go talk to Pepper. Go talk to Pepper Potts. Don't talk to Doctor Strange. There was a very non-magical solution.
I'm not as anti-college as you are. I think college can be a great experience. I think if there's a line to get Pepper Potts to pay for things, it starts with Falcon. Because like someone should be paying these people a salary.
Right.
The idea that they couldn't go in and be like, can the Stark Foundation like pull its funding from MIT unless it stops being dumb, or just like offer a huge grant to Caltech or something, because there's lots of other great colleges,
or just make a new school. Like,
yeah, I mean that could work too. I think one of the things I liked so much about this movie is that I enjoyed a movie about characters making ethical choices I fundamentally disagreed with. Normally, that makes me dislike a movie. I think the thing is, I 100% believed that these are the choices that Spider-Man would make. Especially because I think the thing with college is, and this is why I kind of hate the great power comes great responsibility, I think Peter Parker is showing the danger of that, is showing the the kind of white knight well, white knight often has a lot of sexist connotations. I don't mean it in that way, but like, I'm a recovering codependent. I know
Mm-hmm.
what it's like to define your identity in terms of your ability to help people.
Right.
And it can be very destructive, and it can lead you to helping people who don't want to be helped, or helping people without them without their agency or without their consent. And also it can lead to a feeling of taking responsibility for everything in the world and thus feeling guilty for everything. And I feel like from Peter's perspective, it's not that he thinks that them getting into college has to happen. It's that it is his fault they
Right.
can't get into college, and that they are being punished for their connection to him. And so he has a responsibility to fix that. The healthy thing is for Strange to sit him down and be like, I hear what you're coming from, but let me tell you why that's nonsense and you shouldn't feel this and you can't fix it based on that. But I did feel like what Peter does, everything Peter does, makes total sense, especially after he's told, with great power comes great responsibility, which, by the way, we did a whole episode on why that's not always the best way to live your life. But yeah, so I think for me, like, I totally disagree with his actions. We'll get into more of that later. But it felt at least totally believable to me.
Yeah, for the most part, most of the actions, I agree with that. In terms of, I don't mind seeing a movie where I don't agree with all the actions of the protagonist. That's fine.
Yeah.
I like it when I feel like they're coming from a place of good intention, but sometimes doing something that's misguided. I will say ocw.mit.edu, open courseware, could have just gone there, done all the classes online. Yeah, I think the main thing, and MJ calls him out on this, and I think that's great, is being like, hey, we decided to help you, right? Like, we had agency in that. And if you want to try and, kind of remove the consequences for that by like trying to get us in, then you should talk to us about that, right? Like, don't just go trying to do world altering things on our behalf. Like, talk to us about it and we can talk it through. And maybe we're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Go do that. Talk to your buddy Strange. Or like, maybe we'll be like, whoa. It's okay. Like, we'll figure it out. We'll take a year off. Like, things will cool down and then we'll get in somewhere in a year. Like, or we'll go to MIT Open Courseware online. Like, whatever. Like, workshop it,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, when you're about to cast a world-altering spell, maybe workshop it first to be like, this is the fine print. Let's talk about it. So be like, oh, let's start doing this. And then, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, what do you want to do? Add some paprika? Okay. Wait, no, that was vision. Anyway.
I think, again, Strange is utterly ridiculous. In some regard, like, I mean, Spider-Man's also a hero. He's 17. He's not legally an adult. He's being treated as an adult for most intents. So it's not that I want to give Strange more responsibility, but Strange is kind of a mentor adult figure to Spider-Man. And there again, I think he's completely wrong, but I also 100% believe it. Because I feel like for Strange, it is so important that he look good to other people, that he be a hero. And then I think he kind of likes showing off the magic and what the magic can do. And so the idea that he would be like, all right, I'm going to do this for the kid. I'm not going to do this with the kid.
Right.
So I've made the decision. I'm going to do what he wants. He's going to take it. Then once Peter starts yelling at him, he should have just been like, here's a spell. We're done. You can't change it. He kind of has to do that for the plot. And that's a little bit eye-rolly, but yeah.
Yeah, I also kind of believe it. Not quite as much as I believe Tony building Ultron by accident and then Vision on purpose after building Ultron. Like, that I totally buy. Here, I buy the basic gist of it, but like the way the whole thing happened, I was like, oh, okay. You asked if my collar was popped on purpose. It is in honor of Doctor Strange, who got totally nerfed in this movie.
Fair.
I thought the most ridiculous part, I mean, him doing all this irresponsible magic stuff is one thing, but him getting just totally punked by Peter in the mirror dimension, like, because math? No. Like, no.
I'm a liberal arts person. I know you're much better at math than I was, so I wasn't sure if you would like cheer for that or be like, no, that's really, really dumb.
Yeah, like, I like the idea of someone doing something successfully because math, but like, in that actual context, I was like, I think Strange also probably studied some math and geometry and stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I didn't buy that. And you know,
Yeah.
it was like, yeah, math. Okay, great. You know, and like conceptually, but it's like this. He took down Dormammu. He outthought Dormammu. Like, I don't think he's getting punked by this 17-year-old Spider-Man. And then if this Spider-Man is that powerful, then this Spider-Man getting punked by Green Goblin later. Like it felt like the power, like it reminded me of season 8 of Game of Thrones, and most people don't take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
In terms of just sort of the writers being like, this is how powerful we want this person to be at this moment so that we get this result.
Yeah. No, I think it's very fair. So let's talk about where I think Peter especially goes deeply off the rails. And this was probably the part ethically, and this was the part that bothered me the most because I think of the connotations of it. What did you think about Peter's desire to fix the villains?
Right. I think it's very interesting. And I think the villains are not all the same, right?
Yep.
Each one of them has been altered in some way each one of them is to some extent a science experiment gone wrong, right?
Right.
And it's interesting that like there's that many Spider-Man villains where that's the case. You know, that's kind of the case of like a lot of superhero villains, I guess. Right? I mean, that's a lot of superhero origin stories. Maybe you'll become the Flash. Maybe you'll become Spider-Man. Maybe you'll become Green Goblin or Doc Ock. We don't know what'll happen, you know?
Mr. Freeze, I think you could say in that same
Yeah,
regard.
exactly. Absolutely. So I think it's interesting that, but like some of them, it seems like their mind was changed a lot by it. And some of them, they weren't. And so I do think the idea of fixing them, like if you regard what's sort of like going on with them as being like an analog for like mental illness or disability or queerness or anything that like someone might consider undesirable, but someone else might say, hey, that's just part of who I am. Then I think this idea of fixing someone, I think is very deeply disturbed and out of line and is not something we should do. At the same time, these are people who were one way and then something happened to them, and then they're another way that's maybe not the way they wanted to be when they were that first way.
Right.
So I think it's complicated. You know, I don't think it's as simple as this is necessarily a direct analog for something else that like we really shouldn't be going around trying to change people or cure people of.
Right. I think that's so important, and I want to get into the individuals because I think it's different for each one. It's interesting to talk about them. But just on this overall point, the difference is a big part of the problem because, yeah, I do see this in a lot of ways, I think very legitimately, as a metaphor of mental illness specifically. Because I think in some ways it is. Part of the idea is that they're all out of their minds, that they're all by sort of, you know, pejorative uses of this word, you know, insane or things like that, or that they're not in their rational mind. With someone like Doc Ock, I think you can make that legitimate case. Because clearly in his case, it's not even mental illness. There is a foreign body that is influencing his thoughts in ways that he has no control over.
Right. He has a physical, technical parasite attacking his brainstem, basically.
And so if you want to say that he, therefore, does not have the capacity to make this decision as to whether or not he should be fixed, okay, I can buy that. I think that's very dangerous territory, but I think he's the very specific case. But for the rest of them, I think there's often a conceit, and I'll use some of my actual personal experience with my work. There's a conceit that there is one definition of mental health, and that that every person, if they were healthy, would want to be healthy. And so it becomes this catch-22, quite literally, of you not consenting to be fixed is proof of the fact that you are mentally unwell and cannot consent to it. And I think that's really problematic and in our own world gets into really dangerous places. One of my first jobs, I worked for a law firm that represented mentally ill folk. And one of our biggest cases was on behalf of a whole group of people who are living with severe mental illness, most often schizophrenia, that caused them to lead lives that the people around them thought were unlivable. because they were
Mm.
living on the streets or in very low income situations, because they were often living surrounded by, in very messy situations or dirty situations. They couldn't, hold relationships the way other people would define them, or hold down work as other people would define them. And so there was an idea of no person in their right mind would willingly choose this. But our client group was those people, because at that point in time, I don't know what is happening today, and I want to be very clear, I am in no means, I think mental health medication can be absolutely life-saving. It certainly has in my case. I'm in no means denigrating it across the board. At that time, in the early 2000s, for this very specific medical situation, often the medication would put people into what they kind of described as a zombie state, that they just felt numb, and they couldn't, often their artistic creations or anything like that, they couldn't be creative. They hated the life that it made them live. And so they wanted the freedom to have the agency to choose this life that other people would find untenable, and that they would accept the consequences of that life. Now, with criminal behavior, or behavior that is like deeply, part of the point there is that they're not hurting anybody except perhaps themselves. So of course they should have that right. With these folks, it becomes a very different situation where it's, okay, they're doing antisocial behavior. They're hurting other people. And I think this is one of the fundamental parts of the criminal justice system debates. You've got all these movies about, like, could you fix someone? Can you lobotomize someone so that they are not wanting to perform criminal activities anymore? I feel like this movie kind of shows how dangerous that is, because, yeah, like, I would like it if, someone chose not to do things that are harmful to others. And if they continue to choose that, there should be consequences. And then maybe you should offer them the option of, like, hey, how about if we could help you not want to feel these things? But the way Peter takes away their agency and treats them as though they're all the same, it to me is just fundamentally wrong. And it's wrong in this world, but also in terms of the metaphor it's building for mental illness. I really did not like it.
Yeah, I hear all that. I mean, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Right? The thing that does make this tricky is that I actually don't remember if all these characters are actually like homicidal, if they're going around killing people a bunch. Obviously, Green Goblin is right. And also, like, Norman Osborn is in there, so I think that's also a tricky case.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we look at them case by case, I think you covered Doc Ock. I agree there. I do think it's a difficult place, right? It's like, what do you do when someone's doing a bunch of destructive things, when someone's engaging in a lot of destructive behavior? And, like, can you control them? Can you let someone still be who they are without doing some of the things they want to do that will, make someone else not who they are because they're dead?
I mean, this is the Killing Joke debate of,
right.
It's wrong to kill Joker, but if there's literally no way to keep Joker from harming people, does it then become legitimate to kill Joker? And to me, the answer to all that is build better security at Arkham. Like, you should be able to stop him. But yeah, it's the same question of, where does our desire to help people run up into the fact that these people are hurting others? And that's certainly another question I think we'll get into for sure.
Yeah, for sure. If we look at Osborn, like, Norman Osborn says he wants to be cured, basically, right? And then pretends to help, or maybe is helping, but then Green Goblin's in there somewhere. So that's tricky.
Yeah.
And that is because... what happened in the first Spider-Man movie? Did he deliberately dose himself, or did he get...
And here's the thing that I think the movie kind of gets wrong. In the first... At this point, it's almost kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. Green Goblin is all of his worst instincts, but Norman Osborn, as presented in this movie, is all of his good instincts. But it's not that the original Norman Osborn was this great, loving, happy guy.
No.
The original Norman Osborn was a businessman who killed the people who worked for him, who screwed up, and then decided to become the Green Goblin himself. So, like, the Jekyll and Hyde thing, like, there's a line that Otto says at one point where he's talking to Norman about how he's going to be healed, and he says, "You're about to become whole again. No more darker half." But your darker half is part of you, so if you take it away, you are not whole.
You're about to become half again. Wait.
I'm not a therapist. I want to be very clear here. The conditions that he is exhibiting are what is now understood as dissociative identity disorder, which used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder.
Right.
And I think you can say in his case, it's in part because of like the Green Goblin chemicals, so it's not quite the same. But my understanding is that a lot of times the part of the thing there is that due to trauma, different parts of you have separated. But it's all like
Mm.
the part of the goal is not the destruction of the other identities, it's the reintegration of all the identities.
Right.
And
Right.
so, yeah. Anyway, I kind of cut you off, but I just want to go on that because that bothered me so much.
Yeah, no, I think that that line really does stick out. And I was like, wasn't this a dude who was like I feel like he was doing some bad stuff before he was Green Goblin.
Mhm.
I mean, he was a military contractor in the first place,
Yeah.
like developing, like horrible weapons. Like
He was a pretty awful father.
right, he was definitely a bad dad. He wasn't Octavius, right?
Yeah.
Who was, I think, trying to do some good things, and then it just went all wrong, and then he got basically,
Mhm.
controlled by the tentacles as much as anything. I think the lizard is very clearly in the opposite camp of like just doesn't want to, that's who he wanted to be,
Yeah.
right?
No, he had full agency the entire time.
Yeah, so that seems very clear. Sandman is kind of like up in the air, I think,
Yeah.
kind of like changed back and forth about what he wanted. So I think that's a little unclear. Electro also was like, no, I want to keep this power. And it wasn't like necessarily the power like made him evil. It was like he was mad about what happened and how he'd been,
Yeah.
he'd been put down his whole life basically, right? And now he's got all this power. He wants to keep the power. If he's going to use the power to hurt people, taking away the power seems to make some sense. Like sort of like energy bending or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like see The Last Airbender. He clearly didn't want to be like helped or
Yeah.
whatever.
No, Electro to me is perhaps like I think actually Electro and Sandman are the two most interesting cases. The Lizard Man is too, but he's just not that interesting a character.
Right, it's
but
just
like
not. Yeah, we can just
Sandman, it's always been he never wants to hurt people. He's trying to help his family, but he's put in these terrible situations.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't think there's ever a case. I think he always is making what he thinks are the rational choices he has to make. Electro, if you're going to fix him, you've got to fix racism. You've got to fix classism. Because to me, more than anything, like Max, the character, before he becomes Electro, is someone who's just basically been kicked around all of his life. And so has this idea of like, no one has ever treated me with respect. No one's ever given me any power. No one's ever treated me well. And now suddenly I have the ability, to use my power to get those things. And
yeah,
in some ways, it's kind of heartbreaking when he's kind of like, yeah, I guess I'm unplugged. And he's sort of like, yeah, I don't want to hurt people, but like he misses that life, And
yeah.
I think they didn't want to make Jamie Foxx look as nebbishy as he looked the first time, which is fair,
Right.
But he's also just older. That's again part of the problem. It's like to me, like there's this thing in therapy that I learned when I was a pastor called systems theory, which is sort of like no individual acts on their own. Everything is part of these larger systems. So, for example, if you've got a 10-year-old who's acting out in school, okay, maybe you can do work with the 10-year-old, but also ask, like, is he not getting attention at home? Is there reasons why he's like, what's the larger systemic issues that are causing the one person to act out in a particular way? By the way, Encanto, I think, is a brilliant exploration of these questions, and that's a whole other story. And yeah, so the idea that, like, with all of them, but especially with Max, with Electro, that you can just fix him as though his circumstances had nothing to do with who he is, just it made no sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say there was that wonderful moment between Electro and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man about, like, I thought you'd be black, like you're from Queens, like, and there's like, I'm sure there's a black Spider-Man out there, and like knowing, having Miles Morales and having that movie have been out already, I think that felt like a nice moment to me.
I like that both as a kind of setting up Miles Morales, but also a little bit of a self-own of like, yeah, we probably should have had a black Spider-Man by now, like
right, exactly.
So going a little further on this idea of him trying to fix them, I think this also gets to what is my main problem, or one of my main problems with all this like power and responsibility thing, is that it feels like his desire is to fix specifically the things that he has done wrong. Like, I caused this, so I have to fix it. I have to give these people another chance. And I think part of what infuriates me, and this is the other big ethical question, is he only can look at the things that he wants to fix without looking at the larger consequences, So like he wants to fix them getting into college. He doesn't think about what's that going to mean for everybody else. And yeah, Strange should have told him, that's fine. But like, to me, he basically like lets all these people go free so he can help fix them. And then they break away from him. I think he's kind of morally responsible for the things they do, and like, and granted, the story never shows us that Osborn hurts anybody in all those hours he's out running around free. I kind of have some eyebrow raised, but he does kill Aunt May, which we can have some talk about the fridging aspect of that and all that. We talked about this back in Jessica Jones, when Jessica fought against her mother going to the raft, and then her mother did escape and killed people. And there's this question of like, is Jessica responsible therefore? To me, this feels like the same question of, if you're going to say, I want to help these people, even though right now they want to do harm, I think you still have to ensure that they're not going to be able to do harm. And if you don't, you're on some level responsible for the harm they cause.
Yeah, I think it's very different from the, I'm not going to kill this person, and that doesn't make me responsible for all the harm that they might cause because Arkham has terrible security.
Right.
And here it's set up as like, oh, if you send them back, they're just going to die immediately. And so you're essentially killing them. And so they're kind of trying to make that sort of connection, I think.
Which also makes no sense, because the whole point is they were pulled out like moments before their death. And so like, as Doc Ock is falling over that cliff into the water, him shouting out, wait, no, Peter, I don't mean it, I want to be good. I think he's still going to die. Like, I don't think fixing him is going to matter.
Right. Exactly. It's like they're going to go back, and now they don't even have any powers to protect them. So like they're still going to just get killed, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. That whole thing, but like just leaving that behind, just leaving that aside. And I think to some extent Aunt May bears some of the responsibility in that she was like, oh, but we help people, Peter. We have to, you can't just send him back. Whatever, blah, 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 blah,
right.
And then the fact that she's the one who then gets killed as a result of it, and we don't see any other collateral damage, really, even though if you have a fight like that in a condo, building, like, some people might get hurt, but I do think letting Osborn run loose in the lab, and like, I don't know, I didn't buy that. I was like, of course he's going to be still... There's no, like, he's not Green Goblin anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's got these two halves of him. But, like, why would the evil half, like, make it look like... not pretend not to be in control, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he was in control. Like, so that whole thing just, like, that had me huge, just, like, rolling my eyes and just, like, cringing and, like, they're gonna kill someone because of this. And then they did. And I was
mm-hmm.
like... And yeah, just to, like, very briefly touch on the fridging, like... I guess there were technically 4 female characters. One of them got fridged. One of them was damseled. What happened to the third one? Oh, one was mind wiped non-consensually. And then the fourth one was a reporter who like had a few lines.
Yeah.
So like not the best look. Not the best look. The fact that these are all these characters coming back from those other movies, it does show how, male-centric movies have been for so long, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I guess they could have brought back the MJs and the, and the like Gwen Stacy's or whatever, like if they wanted to not have it be so. But, they wanted these characters. They took one from each of the previous 5 movies, right?
Right.
Like one villain from each. And then I don't know if I think Peter felt responsible for that. And then that line being delivered then, like, it's weird because I felt like that whole thing was very dragged out. Maybe because it felt like it was happening in bullet time, because I felt like I knew what was going to happen constantly before it was happening. And they were doing the fake out, oh no, she's okay, right? And then like later they're like the fake out, no, he got stabbed, no, he's okay. That was like that was kind of like the unsufferable category for me.
Yeah, I knew the minute that stuff fell on her, she was dead. Like, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I hated the fake out there. I would have been very annoyed if Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man had died, so I was glad he lived, but it did also feel like there it felt like less of like he got hurt. Like there was less of the
right. Yeah, that doesn't bother me so much. I did feel it was weird though, kind of like, I mean, I guess they didn't move on right from that, but like they sort of did. Like, I don't know, it just it felt that part felt a little off to me. But I do think the question of responsibility for like when Tony if he lets someone out of the raft so he can work with them, it's like, well, it's on him, like who he's,
Yeah.
or I guess Cap broke a bunch of people out of the raft, right? Like if they then went and like if Black Widow's like, oh, I'm just gonna pop this guy, just kill this guy over here, like, yeah, that's on you, Of course, we know that's not really what she's doing anymore, but like, yeah, I do think that Peter has responsibility for what they were doing while they were free. I mean, he has more responsibility for just being an idiot and like just being like, oh yeah, Osborn, you could just you get that done. I'll just turn around and not watch you. And it's like, really? But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely hear all that. I think it's that, and again, I believe it for the character. I believe that he is this just incredibly myopic, like, he can only see things through the lens of his own responsibility. And that's why one thing I loved is that we never got the Spider-Man origin story. We were like, we don't need it. And so to sort of give us the origin story at this point, it's like, come on.
It felt like Martha's Pearls one more time in slow motion.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it just felt, it felt unnecessary. It felt strained. I just didn't love it.
Everything after that, I really did love, though.
Yeah.
Like, mostly. The parts that I liked most about the movie, honestly, I could have stopped watching it there.
That's fair.
If I weren't podcasting on it 2 days later. And that would have been a shame because the best parts were after.
Yeah.
I think I did pause it and get up and go to the bathroom or whatever and come back. And when I first started the movie, literally I pressed the play button and I got just like a stab of pain in my head. And I was like, I haven't had a bad headache in like 2 weeks. I just pressed pause and then took a beat and I was fine. Mm-hmm. And then we watched the movie. But like if I was in the theater and I got a stab of pain in my head right when it started and like wasn't able to be like, oh, I'm going to do Tai Chi for a minute, like I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to bring my blood pressure down. Like maybe the entire movie would have been a miserable experience. So watching it at home, being able to pause it when I was frustrated with it and then come back to it and be like, okay, let's see what happens. I was like apprehensive going into the movie. But I tried to kind of just give it just go in with an open eye and be like, look, I know all these things are probably going to happen, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Right. Let's just
see a movie. And, I think I've mentioned most of the parts I really didn't like already. But there were a bunch of really good moments. Yeah. And, I'm glad that I think it leads to a really good conversation of things to touch on.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. Normally, what I was saying before, I'm fine if I disagree with a character, but generally I have a problem if I disagree with a writer. Where like at least I want the writer to see the problem with the character that I see. And like that's the fundamental reason I don't like Punisher is I feel like the writers don't understand that he's not a hero. Here I feel it's interesting that I don't think the writers got it, but I don't think the writers saw the problems with Peter that you and I do, but I still was able to enjoy it.
Yeah. I think it's in between a little bit. I feel like they have some sort of idea of that, but maybe actually think he's doing the right thing, even if it's questionable.
Right.
I don't
know. The fact that he doesn't get a happy ending, the fact that and then there's one more to talk about agency we'll get to at the very end.
That thing. Yeah. Yep.
But I will say, I thought the scene of the three Peters on the rooftop and them talking to him, like them basically talking him through his feelings. First of all, him saying, like, don't tell me you've experienced this. I don't want to hear it. I was just like, yeah,
right. It's like,
set some boundaries. I don't want to hear platitudes.
Yeah.
But then the fact that they don't say that, they just tell their own stories. It was just so beautiful. And to me, because I kind of thought part of what they were getting at was you can't feel responsible for everything. You're not responsible for everything. All you can do is the best you can do. And that I loved.
Yeah, I think that's a great message, and I did really enjoy that interaction, even though what set it up felt like this mechanically refrigerating sort of
paint by numbers
plot
kind of
device. Yeah.
I'll also say about that, we are so used to male friendship being shown as insulting each other and making fun of each other and sort of like barely acknowledging your feelings for each other. And so the fact that these three guys are basically just opening their hearts to each other pretty quickly. And then even like Garfield is like, I just love you guys. Like I never had brothers. I loved that. I thought that was such a nice change of how you often see male-male relationships portrayed.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, and like sort of how you know, when Tom Holland Spider-Man is like, you know, I was in the Avengers, and they're like, oh, you were in a band? That's so cool.
So
He's like,
good.
No," but like they were like so excited for him, you know.
Right.
Like I really do love seeing a relationship like that. Even, I mean, even if it's all with themselves in a way, but like
Yeah.
they really are different people. I mean, they have the same name, they have the same origin story more or less, but like they are different people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, those were all so good. And the fact like that they didn't have to one up each other, that it could be like, "Oh, you went to space?" Like he was jealous, but he wasn't
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that sucks. You should have gone." Like they were just like,
Like happy for each other, basically. And, you know, compassionate towards each other when they were sharing their
yeah.
less, you know, happy memories.
I also liked, similar to how they kind of at least called out that there probably should have been some black characters in a Black Spider-Man before now. I really liked that they called out the whole thing about the web shooters.
Mm,
Because, granted, the
yeah.
first real Spider-Man I saw was Tobey Maguire, so I just thought he always shot things from out of his wrists, and I didn't understand the web shooters in the games. And then later I realized how much Tobey Maguire is the sort of exception.
Right.
And so just them naming that and just them being like, yeah, you all think this is weird. It's just because there's different Spider-Man and they all can be a little different. And here's his little way of being different.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. For sure.
So the last big question I had, and I want to start with, I've been talking a lot about them, so I want to start by letting you answer it first. What do you think of his decision at the very end? Right? I think the clear implication is they asked him to go back and tell them who he is and let them rebuild this connection. But he goes back and he sees that they are now going to college, which was always the sort of first goal, and that they're happy, and he decides to just walk away.
Nope.
What do you think of that?
I didn't particularly like it. It doesn't seem like a great decision. I do think there's an extent to which he could be like, hey, if such and such, would you want to know such and such?
Yeah.
You know? Because, I mean, here's the thing. That person before had some agency in saying, I want you to tell me this. But then
Right.
that person now, like, maybe should have some agency too, in terms of, like, whether they, you know what I mean? And that's the trouble with this kind of,
I hate time travel. I
yeah, yeah,
hate mind control stuff.
yeah.
Because I think you can argue that yes, MJ and Ned in Spider-Man's world clearly said, we want you to come and tell us.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can ask, those people are people who've been shaped by already knowing Peter Parker. So does that mean that these people have consented? It's so thorny, but I think the closest thing you have to those people consenting was a clear yes.
Right.
And I think, yeah, maybe if he asks it in some kind of a like, hey, would you want, like, it's hard to believe that they would take that question seriously because it would seem
Right.
so random.
Like, hey, if you knew Spider-Man and then you got mind wiped and forgot that you knew Spider-Man, would you want to know that you'd known Spider-Man? And be like,
Right.
what?
But him deciding to me, it's that he's once again
Yeah.
taking away the agency from people. He is deciding for them.
He's learned nothing.
He's learned
Just like
nothing.
Boba Fett in episode 7. Like, it's like, I'm still going to make your decisions for you, even though I understand I was wrong before, but now I'm not wrong because reasons.
Yeah. Which is kind of like, I was wrong to make Ultron, but I'll make Vision because
right, exactly. It's just like, I mean, there's an extent to which people don't usually change that much, right? A lot of times people go through experiences and like learn something, but then like don't actually make changes because habit's a powerful thing, you know? But that was frustrating. The entire idea of that spell at the end makes absolutely no sense. I'm just going to kind of call that out. Like,
yeah.
Okay, everybody who knew Peter Parker forgets that they knew Peter Parker. There's still like records though, right? Like, aren't there still all of these things, videos from the day before about Peter Parker being Spider-Man?
I mean, the way this generally works is that all those get erased and
But so then all of those people, basically, you could say that he killed everyone in the world and replaced them with new people who are versions of them who never had those experiences. At least the people who had any of this information, right? I mean,
here's a basic question. How did Happy know Aunt May?
Right,
Happy says he
exactly.
met Aunt May through Spider-Man. How?
I mean, he just doesn't remember that like that was Peter Parker. Like he does. It just none of the sense does it make. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. And that's the trouble with these huge like world altering spells. Is often it's like they did this in Buffy some where like everything would be totally different and whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
you'd be like, how did literally just everything change because of one thing? But then it's like the entire world isn't different. Like it's like now they're in a different part of the multiverse, except they're not,
Right.
because that's the whole point. And it's like it's so illogical that it's hard. Like I disagree with his decision. When writing these types of stories, I feel like often like it's hard not to be so hand wavy that it's just like, oh, just
Yeah.
don't worry about that.
I mean, yeah, because I think these movies forget often the butterfly effect kind of things, you know, where
Yeah.
it's like the idea that these things are going to be the exact same in these universes, even if things have changed, you know?
Right.
To me, one of the best examples is Norman Osborn dies in the first Spider-Man movie. His death is one of the things, it's one of many things, but it clearly has an influence on Otto Octavius, which,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, I love that they made fun of his name. That's another sort of like nice modern touch to looking back to the comic books. But Otto Octavius becoming Doc Ock is clearly in part inspired by Norman dying. If nothing else, because now Norman's company is now ruled by his son, and so that affects the grant that Otto gets.
Right.
If Norman lives, Otto never there's all these causality loops that make no sense because
Yeah.
time travel makes no sense and
Right.
change the whole world makes no sense. Anyway, rant over.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Also, here's the last bit that makes no sense.
Go for
If
it.
you're going to do a spell where everyone forgets who Peter Parker is, there's one more guy who's got to forget who Peter Parker is. And that's Peter Parker. And that would have like at least felt like a holistic solution that still didn't make any sense. But like, I don't know, maybe he could just wake up somewhere and be like,
Right.
who am I? Oh, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But it's just that felt like, wait, he still gets to know who he is? And what if the other Peter Parkers also forgot? And now he's, you know, which isn't to say that was necessarily a bad decision, because like, I guess maybe the world was going to get destroyed. So I guess maybe you do things to try and literally save the world. I don't know. But like, yeah, then you go and tell people who you were. Because like,
Yeah.
they said
Exactly.
they wanted
Especially
to know.
if they specifically asked you to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about all I had for the movie. Any other kind of last little things you wanted to mention? I liked all the high school stuff. I liked the, Flash, like trying to like lop on to the, jump onto the celebrity of it all, write his book.
His book Flashpoint, which I think again is a nod, right?
Yeah. Nice little dig at the DC universe, which was fun.
I don't feel like it's a dig. I feel like it's a,
it's a reference, yeah.
It's an homage. It's a cross comic book company Easter egg.
There you go.
Of sorts. Yeah, I mean, mentoring is dangerous work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a very small number of stories where I've seen like a mentor get bumped off and it's not very annoying. And this wasn't one of those small numbers.
I'd say A New Hope is a pretty good version of it.
Yeah, but also that's sort of like, it almost feels like that's the one that established the trope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you create a trope, it's not a trope yet.
It established the trope,
at least for
science
me.
Fiction movie, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The whole point, like the George Campbell, George Luke, the
Joseph Campbell, yeah.
What is it? What's his actual name?
Joseph
Not George
Campbell.
Campbell. Are they both George Campbell and George Lucas?
Joseph Campbell.
Joseph, thank you. Yeah. The Joseph Campbell, George Lucas conversations, I think, really
Right.
established. Like, that is the mentor has to die for the hero's story to be fully actualized. That goes back thousands of years. But yeah,
sort
New
of,
Hope,
maybe, but yeah.
The way it is New Hope, yeah, definitely, I think, set a new version of it for sure.
Yeah, and it's there's a few other stories where I'm like, okay, like honestly, there's a thing in Defenders that like for some reason didn't bother me. I'm not even totally sure why, but like it didn't really, because it didn't feel like mechanical. It sometimes it just feels like the plot is doing something because it's so clearly like the writers are like following dots on an outline, and that's just how it felt here.
I don't mind tropes, but if you're going to give me a trope, give it to me in a new way.
Right.
Show me that you're doing something interesting with a trope that justifies you putting it in there instead of just putting it in because it's just the thing you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and here I felt like they thought it was interesting because it was Aunt May and not Uncle Ben, but like I don't find that interesting, and it just, yeah, that was, you know, the low point of the movie for me. The beginning was another low stretch. The end was a highlight, you know, not the literal very, very last couple scenes, but the, you know, the three Spider-Mans. Like I thought they had some great moments, and I'm happy I saw the movie for the sake of those at the very least, and for the sake of this conversation.
Definitely. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap this up. Paul, I know you've been doing a lot of stuff. Where can people find the Zen Madman?
I've actually been doing a lot of nothing for like 10 days. This movie viewing was like the end of 10 days of solitude, where I basically just tried to eat really, really well, meditate like almost all day long, and do some like Tai Chi. I started a little bit of yoga, but then that was like too intense, and walk like 10,000, 15,000 steps. And I managed to get rid of my headaches, which I guess maybe that means they weren't migraines. I don't know. And lower my blood pressure like 20%. Hopefully I can remain not super stressed, but I highly recommend taking some time for yourself when possible, and, you know, enjoying life, even when it doesn't mean like, you know, doing big, exciting things. I think, yeah, I don't know. That feels like it sort of goes along with this movie somehow.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think it's fair.
I'm Zen Madman at all the places, so you know you can find me there, and I'll start making some stuff again soon.
I'm currently suffering from quite a lot of back pain, so I'm going to be doing very, very little myself over the next couple days. So I definitely honor what you're talking about. So, Paul, as always, thank you so much. I'm glad I waited because I think you had so much to add to this conversation that I really appreciate it. And for you, the listeners, we'd love to hear what you have to say. What do you think about this movie? I know it's been a little while since some of you saw it. Maybe some of you are watching it again or watching it the first time. What do you think of Peter's actions? Are we thinking about it way too much? You just loved the movie. Do you agree with some of our concerns about it? Do you think some of his concerns are ridiculous? Would love to hear more of your thoughts. If you go to theethicalpanda.com, you'll find all the information about how to contact us, all the information about all the different things that are going on with my podcasting, other things that are going on there. Please check all that out. And most importantly, have a great day.
Bye.